So today we are reviewing Todd McFarlane's DC Multiverse figure of Batman as depicted in Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. This is, to be specific, Batman in his regular costume in that comic book. Recall in the previous video we reviewed the figure of Batman in his armor from that comic book, The Dark Knight Returns. But this is his regular costume, not his armored variant. So, first things first, let's talk about the sculpt. This sculpt, in my opinion, really captures the art style of that comic book, The Dark Knight Returns. That comic book employs a very rough and sort of unfinished quality, if you will. It just doesn't seem like the type of artwork that you would normally expect from a finished product. And that's not to insult it. That, I believe, is a very conscientious choice by the creator, by the writer and illustrator Frank Miller of that comic book to convey, or should I say, to correspond to the gritty tone of the story. So you get this very rough and gritty art style. So let's take a look at the sculpt from different angles. So here it is, the sculpt from its right side. So as you can see, this Batman is very muscular. Here's the back. A very nice cape. There are a lot of wrinkles and folds, which give you the impression that it's a very large cape. So if you were to spread it out, it would be very, very large. But right now it's sort of in a compacted state. This is the sculpt underneath. So yeah, once again, very muscular Batman. This is the sculpt from its left. And once again, this is the sculpt from the front. So this is a very muscular Batman. I think this is the most muscular version of Batman we've ever had in the comic books. I mean, this Batman he's huge. He's very huge. So, next thing, let's take a look at the articulation. So let's start with the head, obviously. 360 degrees of rotation. Do we have that? Yes, we do. Let me just do that with this hand so you can see it. 360 degrees of rotation. Let's see, can it shift to the sides? Not very much, so you don't get as much range as on other figures, but that's still pretty good. But it could have been better. I mean, I've seen better on other figures, but that's still pretty good. Now let's see, can he look up? He can look up by that much. I've seen better on other figures once again, but hey. You can look down by a decent degree. So overall, the articulation of the head it's decent, but I have admittedly seen better. But I'm content with it. Still pretty good. If you combine the range of the head in regard to looking up with the diaphragm joint, as you can see, let's see if we get more range. Wow, it doesn't look like this diaphragm joint really does much. Wow. Doesn't do anything. So I guess that's not much of a help, but we'll get to that in a moment. The diaphragm joint. Let's start off with the shoulders, or should I say, let's continue with the shoulders. So we have 360 degrees of rotation at the shoulders. Both of them, of course. We don't have biceps. So before we move on to the biceps, though, I should demonstrate this. So his arms can bend upwards such that they become parallel to the ground perfectly, so you get a nice 90 degrees of upward movement on the arms at the shoulders, which is really good. Now, if we were to turn the arms upside down, we can bend them up that much. Pretty good. Not completely perpendicular to the surface on which it's standing, but what do you expect? It's a very Diesel sculpt. The muscles on this figure are very large, so that's going to hinder articulation a bit. So considering that, this is pretty good articulation at the shoulders. Now, so the biceps, we don't have bicep swivel, unfortunately. We don't. But we do have swivel at the elbows, I believe, do we? I know the Superman does, but yeah, we do have it, you see? So that sort of compensates for the lack of bicep swivel. You can rotate the arms at the elbows, or should I say you can rotate the forearm at the elbow relative to the upper arm or vice versa. So that's pretty good. As you can see, obviously you can do it on both arms. Give me a second. There we go, as you can see. So, you don't get bicep swivel, but you do get elbow swivel, which is a trade-off, an equal trade-off. You lose one, but you gain another, so you know that's not too bad. So let's take a look at the articulation at the elbows. As you can see, we don't have double joints, unfortunately. So you can't really hold that against it, because even if you did have double joints, the biceps are so thick and the forearms are so thick that you wouldn't be able to bend more than this anyway. You wouldn't get more than 90 degrees worth of bend anyway. So I guess that's why they decided not to put in double joints at the elbows. They would have been useless. So considering the thickness of the sculpt, this is more than acceptable. This is understandable. You can't hold every figure to the same standard, because you know they have different sculpts, and different sculpts permit certain things or prohibit certain things. So keep that in mind. So far I'm pretty satisfied with the articulation, considering the sculpt. Let's take a look at the hands at the wrists. Now, let's see. Oops, my bad. Okay, I gotta put the peg on that way, in the way that it bends. So let's see how much we can get. We can get that much bend. That's really good, actually. And that much backwards. So the articulation at the wrists are pretty good. You can rotate 360 degrees, obviously. Same on this side. I gotta realign the hand with the peg. There we go. So once again, a really good amount of flexibility at the wrists. So very good articulation at the wrist. Now, to this diaphragm joint, which we touched on a bit earlier. Doesn't seem like it really does much. You can't really bend back. You can bend back a little bit, but barely. You can't bend forward at all. Can't really bend to the side, so it looks like a pretty, no offense, useless diaphragm joint. Let's see, can you rotate at the diaphragm? Yes, you can. So the diaphragm is useful in that regard. You can rotate at the diaphragm. As you can see, that's pretty good. Can you rotate at the waist? Let's see. Yes, you can. You can rotate at the waist 360 degrees. So pretty good articulation at the waist, poor articulation at the diaphragm. Everywhere else so far has been decent to good. Let's take a look at the legs at the waist. We can split them apart by this much. The thickness of the thighs prohibit us from bending the legs upwards by any further degree. So keep that in mind, but this is still pretty good considering how thick this figure is, how muscular it is. We do have thigh swivel, which is pretty rare for a Todd McFarlane figure, but because Batman has on this unitard that's pretty much just one singular color, holy crap. I guess they figured that, you know, adding thigh swivel would not break up the sculpt, which it doesn't, so they employed it on this figure. Hopefully it doesn't fall again. Okay, now back to what I was saying. Yeah, they normally don't employ thigh swivel on Todd McFarlane figures, but it doesn't break up the sculpt on this one, so yeah. Now let's try bending the legs forward. They can go by that much. Pretty okay. Nothing fantastic. You don't get 90 degrees. If you do go 90 degrees, the legs bend outwards. So keep that in mind. Get a really wide sort of upside down V. So it's not really intended for you to bend the legs up this much. Keep that in mind. Can you bend them backwards? Same issue. The legs bowl out to the side. I mean, look at that. So not very good there. Now we do have double jointed knees. So that's really good. Look at that. That's fantastic. So you can strike some pretty cool dynamic poses with this figure. Keep that in mind. Put that down. What about the ankles? Let's see. We have ankle rockers. So 360 degrees of rotation at the ankles. As you can see. He's all screwed up at the moment. There we go. Now, you can bend back about that much. Well, actually, yeah, you can bend back even this much. Wow, that's a lot. You can bend upwards by that much. Not as great as the range that you get when bending it downward, but still pretty good. Pretty good. Same on this side, obviously. Quite a bit of range when bending downward. Upwards, relatively limited. You can't really bend to the sides, but you can rotate. Now, if you want to bend the feet to the sides, you'd have to realign the feet on the pegs. I'm not going to bother doing that at the moment. Don't feel like pulling the feet out. I feel a bit of resistance, so I'm not going to do that, but that does seem to be an option. So yeah, that's it for the articulation. So overall, I'd say the articulation is good overall. It's limited, particularly in the diaphragm area, but oh yeah, and obviously at the hips with the legs, that is, you can't really bend the legs backwards or forwards without causing them to flex out to the sides. But apart from that, the articulation is pretty darn good, so I'm very satisfied with the articulation of this figure. Now, let's consider the height of this figure. I typically do that earlier in the review. Forgot to do it. Now, Batman is 6 feet 2 inches tall, and if you consider the thickness of the soles of his footwear, so let's say 6 feet 3, so that's about 75 inches. If you scale that down, that should come up to 7.5 inches, somewhere around that mark. That's a bit of a rough estimate, but he's actually a bit shorter than that. As you can see, he comes up to just slightly above 7 inches, so he's a bit out of scale. Now, I say slightly above 7 inches. Keep in mind that this figure is a 7-inch scale figure, meaning 1/10 scale, and 1/10 of 75 inches is 7.5 inches. So this figure is a bit shorter than it should be, but these figures are rarely ever exactly on the mark. It's in the neighborhood, so just consider that. Let's take a look at the accessories. It comes with this card. As you can see, you get a picture of the figure in this cool pose with some nice lighting and a really cool background. And you get this text on the back. Pretty sure you can't make that out. Let me adjust the focus. I don't know if I want to screw up the focus on this. So you can pause the video if you want to read that. Now let me see if I can get that back to where it was. There we go. So there's the card. We've got the traditional pair of hands, which are his hands balled into fists. So if you want to put him in a fighting pose with balled fists, you use these hands here. And we have this this rope with, is that a battering attached to the end? This rope with a bat-shaped something at the end of it, and you can have him hold it the same way that he's holding it in this photo here. Let me see if I can demonstrate that for you guys. There we go. So he's holding it in his hands. So it'd be something like that. As you can see, this is him holding this rope with this seemingly a battering at the end. Pretty cool. Now, let's compare this figure to its Medicom Mafex counterpart or counterparts. Here is the exact counterpart of the black and gray version by Medicom Mafex. Very cool. Obviously it's shorter because this is in 1/12 scale / 6-inch scale, whereas this one is in 1/10 scale / 7-inch scale. And this is the blue, gray, and yellow version by Medicom Mafex. Same scale as this one, obviously, so they're both shorter than the one by Todd McFarlane. So yeah, and these two, they're very cool looking figures, but I don't think they capture the art style as accurately as the one by Todd McFarlane, because as I mentioned earlier, the art style of the comic book is this very rough and gritty style that seems like something you would typically use for pre-visualization rather than a finished product. And this figure more represents that rough art style, whereas this seems to be sort of an idealized version of that art style. They're not as rough looking as what you would see in the comic book. They're still great figures, though. They're just not stylistically accurate, in my opinion. So, just put them back. Let's do some more comparisons. This is the corresponding armored version of this character by Todd McFarlane. As I mentioned in the previous video, this sculpt, let me just bring them both out because the two variations of the same sculpt. This sculpt does not represent the art style at all. It doesn't represent the design of the character and the armor at all. Todd McFarlane took some serious liberties with this sculpt. The proportions are off. The colors on both are off. Even on this one, which is closer to... Actually, I'm not going to say that. The yellow of the belt is actually pretty accurate based on artwork that I've seen recently. But yeah, the overall design, the shape, the structure of this upper portion is different. Essentially, if you want to get an accurate figure of what the armored Batman looks like in the Dark Knight Returns comic book, this is what you should expect. Albeit, once again, with that sort of idealized version of the art style, but this is what the armor actually looks like in the comic book, not what you see in these two figures here. This is very different. The proportions and some of the details of the armor, very different. Todd took some serious liberties with the design of these figures, with their sculpt. So keep that in mind. I wouldn't even say that they really scale well with this figure either. If you were to consider the thickness of the soles, right? So even if you were to lift them up a bit to take that into account, the thickness of the soles, he still looks a bit shorter. You know, this figure, the armored figures that is, they're of a much larger man, as far as I can tell. Even if you were to imagine him without the armor, it just seems like a larger man. Look at the arm. That looks like a longer arm to me. Am I imagining that? Let me take a good look at that. Yeah, the arm it seems longer. So, as I said in the previous video, I think that Todd McFarlane intended for this sculpt, the sculpt shared by these two figures, to be for his own sort of idealized armored Batman, but somewhere along the line, he decided to make it part of the Dark Knight Returns wave, and so this is what we got in the end. But this isn't really from the Dark Knight Returns. It just looks so different from what you get in that comic book. So, let me just put these back. Now this is him next to the Joker as depicted in the Dark Knight Returns. Once again, as we've seen with all of the figures in this line, except for the armored Batmans, these figures really capture the rough and gritty art style. They're very accurate. They're not idealized. They're just perfect representations of that art style. Let me turn down the exposure a bit. Seems like he's way too bright. There we go. Really captures that art style. Whereas if you look at the corresponding Medicom Mafex one, it seems sort of quote-unquote perfected or idealized. It's not as rough as what you get in the comic book, in my opinion. But still pretty darn good. Still pretty good. Yeah. So, put these two back. Oh, crap. I hate when that happens. Here is Superman from this line. I'm gonna turn it back up, the exposure. Here we go. So here's Superman. Maybe that's a bit too high, the exposure. I'll just keep it where it was. So here is Superman from this line. Yep, this once again captures the rough and gritty art style. This really looks like Superman as he's depicted in that comic book. And he is taller than Batman. That's been pretty rare for Todd McFarlane. For most of the Batman and Superman figures we've gotten from Todd McFarlane, it seems like Batman has always been taller. If they're part of the same wave, the Batman and corresponding Superman figure, the Batman figure has typically been taller. But that's not the case with this line, so that's good. Because in the comic books, Superman is taller than Batman. Superman is 6'3", Batman is 6'2", and Superman is overall just a bit more muscular than Batman, and we get that with these two figures here, which is fantastic. Let's bring in Carrie Kelly. This is from Todd McFarlane, so part of this line, and this is the Carrie Kelly by Medicom Mafex. So she's obviously in scale with this guy. I mean, she came with this guy, but I'm bringing this guy out because this guy is the corresponding figure to him. So yeah, as you can see, this is how these scale together. I don't have the corresponding Superman by Medicom Mafex. That hasn't been released yet, but when it is, I will review it and I will compare it to this. So yeah, let me put these guys back now. Let's take a look at this horse. This is the Build-A-Figure. Well, I believe with Todd McFarlane's figures, they're not called Build-A-Figures. They're called, let's see, one of the boxes, Collect to Build. So I guess they're called Collect to Builds. I've heard them referred to as Collect and Connects, but I just see Collect to Build on the box. So I guess this would be called the Collect to Build. But this is the horse that you can assemble with the parts that come with each of the figures in this wave, minus the armored Batmans. They don't come with any parts. I don't even really consider those armored Batmans as part of the wave. I mean, they're technically based on Batman as depicted in the comic books, from which these figures, this one, the Superman figure and the Joker figure right here, and the Carrie Kelly are based, or taken I should say, but they're just their own thing. They were released much earlier than these other figures, so I don't really consider them as part of this wave. But yeah, as I was saying, each of the figures in this wave come with a part of this horse, and you put them together and you get the horse, and this is the horse. Now in that comic book, there's a part in the story where Batman rides a black horse, and he sort of, rallies everyone in Gotham together to bring order to the streets, because due to a nuclear explosion, society has devolved into a state of chaos. Here we go. Sit him on the horse. Can you put his feet through the... Hold on, let me see if I can get his feet through the... I think they're called stirrups. Okay, let's see if I can get his feet in there. All right, that's one foot. What about the other one? There we go. So yeah, you can get his feet in there. Very nice. Obviously, I would have to put his hands on the reins, but you know how that would look. I just want to show you guys how big this horse is compared to, say, a 1/12 scale horse by Figma. So let me get that horse. Alright, here is a 1/12 scale horse by Figma. As you can see, it's noticeably smaller. Let me put them to the side, facing the side, so that you can see. You can see the horse by Todd McFarlane. It's much bigger. It's huge compared to the Figma horse. The Figma horse is noticeably smaller. Yeah, so there's that. Pretty sure that's not correct. Anyway, yeah, so as you can see, the horse by Todd McFarlane is much bigger. It's a 1/10 scale horse, whereas this is a 1/12 scale horse, the one by Figma. So there is quite a difference in size. So yeah, this horse is pretty big. And it's a pretty cool collect to build. I'm very happy that I built it. Very happy that I collected all the figures in this wave and assembled this horse. It's really cool. So that's it for this review of Todd McFarlane's DC Multiverse figure of Batman as depicted in Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. Be sure to leave some comments below, to thumb this video up, and to hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching.